Well, it's great to be here today. My name is Darin Talbot. I'm honored to be here as part of the Douglas County Historical Society, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here and to let you know a little bit more about Lake Tahoe. Now, I've lived in Lake Tahoe for 32 years, and I may be the most obsessed man about Lake Tahoe that has ever lived. They call me Mr. Tahoe, the voice of Lake Tahoe. Tahoe is Jimmy Buffett, the Tahoe troubadour. I don't know what any of it really means other than to say that they think that maybe nobody would ever invest as much time into one place as I have. But for me, Lake Tahoe is just, there's no place like it. There's no lake like it in the world, in my opinion. And we've all sat here, and I met a lady last week in Reno. She had never been to Lake Tahoe, and she had lived in Reno almost 25 years. And I mean, my heart started racing. I was like, how irresponsible of you. You know, well, you're not going to go up there? Why wouldn't you go up there? You don't have a car. What is it? So, but anyway, I'm really excited to tell you some of the stuff on Around Tahoe. Around Tahoe is my self-guided tour. It took me about 5 years to make this. This is really my life's passion. I've been singing about the lake, and I must apologize. I'm going to lecture tonight. My guitar is being worked on a little bit. I've been singing too much, and but my life's passion has been to become Mr. Tahoe. I remember telling my mom when I was 16, I said, "I'm going to be Mr. Tahoe." She said, "Don't you have bigger plans for yourself?" I said, "Well, it's a pretty big lake. Am I supposed to find a bigger lake?" And she said, "Forget it." So now she always says, "I understand your insanity now." And she said, "It truly is insanity." I said, "No, it's obsession. It's different. It depends on how you define it." Now, the name Lake Tahoe is a really interesting story. Because we have 1/3 of the lake in Nevada and 2/3 in California, and the border runs right through the waters, making things rather sticky around here. Can't seem to get anything done right because of that reason. And it's of no surprise to anybody. But in 1844, Captain John C. Fremont came over the Southern Pass on Valentine's Day. Of course, Valentine's Day wasn't anything in those days. Nobody celebrated Valentine's Day. But as he came over the pass, he climbed to the top of the mountain with a surveyor just to get his bearings straight. He simply didn't know where he was. They were commissioned to find out what was inside the Sierra Nevada mountain range. They simply didn't know. And when they got to the top of the mountain, lo and behold, Lake Tahoe was just sitting out there. Now, Fremont called the lake Lake Bonpland. That was after a French botanist, but nobody knew who he was, so nobody cared. Now, on a map in the mid-1800s, it was listed. This was the official listing of Lake Tahoe, perhaps the most horrible naming job in the history of the world. It was listed as Bonpland, Fremont, it was listed as Mountain Lake, Bonpland, Fremont, question mark. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school, I couldn't do something like that. I mean, that was just bad. That was just bad grammar. You can't do that. What does that mean? We take one of their names, we can make it one of them. In a way, it's like a trivia thing or something. So the truth of the matter is, one side of the lake would name it one thing, and the other side of the lake would name it something else, and neither of them would ever have consensus. They would never seem to agree with each other on the name. Now, in the late 1800s, it started to take the name Lake Bigler after the third governor of California, John Bigler. But famed writer Mark Twain, who loved Lake Tahoe, calling the lake the fairest picture the whole earth affords, said, "It's amazing that such a beautiful lake would be named after such a horrible governor." Bigler wasn't even popular in California. And they were calling Bigler as far as Virginia City, well inside the Nevada line. One detractor went so far as to ask, "How can you name a lake with no bottom after a man who saw bottom?" So Bigler just simply wasn't popular. And that's when the Nevada side started to ask the Native Americans, the Indians, who had been here some 4,000 years. Maybe they know what they're talking about. Maybe you ought to ask the source, right? Well, the Paiutes and the Washoe Indians were both here, and there's so much dispute over who's really more represented. We think the Washoes are obviously more represented in the valley or in the basin than the Paiutes, but some Paiute Indians will argue this way. And even Mark Twain himself said the Paiutes called the lake Dahoe, meaning Lake of the Sky, and Dahoe by itself meaning big water. But Lake of the Sky, not because the lake's at a high elevation, 6,225 feet, but rather because the lake takes on the color of the sky, acting as a massive prism. When you're at the lake sometime on a sort of half cloudy day, look at the lake and you'll see how wherever it is under the clouds, it'll be gray. And wherever the light is coming through, it's blue. And it's literally multiple colors at one time because of this effect, this prism effect of the unbelievable clarity of the water. See, the water's so clear, it acts as a massive prism. It just literally reflects. That's why when we see the greens and the blues in the lake, that's just simply the prism effect. On the shallower end, we're seeing more of the green part of the spectrum, and on the deeper water, we're seeing more of the blue part of the spectrum. So Tahoe, with a D, is the real term. Leave it to the English to screw it up. As I said, it is simply too hard to say this Tahoe thing. Let's call it Tahoe with a T. So it was an English mispronunciation. So they finally named it Tahoe, and that was the official name. Now, the Indians obviously fought over Cape Rock, and this is the interesting point. I actually met a Paiute Indian recently, and I was so excited to meet him. I was like, okay, I need to talk to you, because on some of the stories it says that the Washoe Indians were the kind and sweet and gentle tribe, and that the Paiutes were nomads and more dangerous and more threatening, you know. And then I read something else, and of course the Paiutes says, no, that's the Washoes. Nice people. I'm sure you are. Now, one of the stories I wanted to tell, I mean, there's so many great stories about Lake Tahoe, and I think one of the things that has never been really brought to life are some of the more unusual stories, like, for example, the story of Frank Sinatra and the Calamita. Now, the Calamita, you know, as you know, has been there as one of the most famous hotels on Lake Tahoe, and the story is really interesting. I mean, it's sort of shrouded in mystery. But one of the great mysteries of the Calamita is why it hasn't been more successful. This hotel has been on hard times for so long. The story behind it is fantastic. And you would think Hilton or Sheraton would come along and buy the Calamita and turn it into what it always should be, this grand place that everybody should go to. But let's start with the story. In 1926, a man by the name of Robert P. Sherman built the Calamita, and he built it to schmooze his real estate clients. See, he felt if they came to Lake Tahoe and looked at the fabled blue waters of Lake Tahoe, they would sign on the dotted line. He did a lot of business until his hotel burned to the ground. And then he rebuilt it with 500 men in 30 days. Can't imagine he got anything more than the casino floor done. Only what matters most. Then he sold it to the Mafia. The Mafia ran it in the 40s and 50s, and they drove it straight into the ground. And then in 1960, old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra bought the property with his partners Wingy and Skinny. You get the idea. Now, when he bought the property, he needed a $2 million loan to fix the place up, so he called his old buddy Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana being the mafia boss in Chicago, the most wanted man in America. Sam said, "Don't worry about it, Frank. I get you the $2 million. He says, "That's great." So Sam called Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa, working for the Teamsters Union, could seem to finance anything in those days. But Jimmy told Sam, he said, "Can't help you right now, Sam. I'm a little tied up." Sam says, "Very interesting, Jim. Very interesting." Well, the story goes that nobody says no to Sam Giancana, because if you do, you're often no longer here. And that seems to be Jimmy Hoffa's biggest problem, you know. Nobody knows where he is for some 35 years. So I like to perpetuate my own legends, you know. I believe Jimmy Hoffa's buried in Lake Tahoe. He's got a pair of concrete galoshes on down there, and he looks like $1 million. Why? Well, the lake is so deep and so cold, it preserves everything. Well, of course, Sam would get the $2 million from Frank, regardless of Jimmy Hoffa, and he would call Frank Sinatra and he'd say, "I'm coming to the Calamita, and I expect to be treated like a king." And Frank would say, "Sure, Sam, come on down. Should be a real good time. You know, you're only the most wanted man in America. Probably lose my gaming license. Bring the entourage." And of course, Sam would. He'd bring everybody. And they would bring him in by ship in the middle of the night onto the beach and bring him up through a special passageway so they weren't noticed by the public. And then when they would get into the hotel, Frank would be ready to dress Sam incognito with beards and mustaches and glasses and hats. And whatever it took to make sure that the mob boss was not noticed, gallivanting around the floors of the Calamita. Now, at this point, you've got to believe that Frank was probably wondering why he ever took this $2 million from Sam Giancana. And he probably was afraid of Sam Giancana, to be sure, because Sam could have just taken care of Frank, and that would have been just business as usual for Sam. And Frank would be down there with Jimmy Hoffa right now, watching the lake. So Frank was just sweating it out, you know. Now, Marilyn Monroe was dating Sam Giancana in those days. And Marilyn would come to the Calamita many, many times, and it wasn't to see Frank Sinatra, but rather to seek refuge from Sam Giancana himself. She would say, "He's mean to me. He has a temper." And of course he doesn't. He kills people for it. What part of the memo did you not understand? Now, Marilyn had her own room called the Marilyn Monroe room. That wasn't because she enjoyed the easygoing resort life or the great view from her cabin, but rather she was hiding inside a closet, praying that Frank Sinatra could find a way to keep Sam Giancana away from the county for just one more time. And Sam would call, and Frank would answer, and Sam would say, "Have you seen Marilyn?" Frank would say, "I don't know where she is. Sam, who knows? You know Marilyn, she's all over the place." So Frank constructed underground caves that led from Marilyn and Frank's room to the casino floor, so neither one of them had to be noticed by the public. And there was even a possibility that Sam Giancana could have been staying in his cabin, and Marilyn Monroe could have been in hers, and neither one of them would have known that the other was there. This is one way that Frank tactically did what he could to try to protect Marilyn from Sam, because Marilyn, of course, didn't want to be with Sam anymore. But of course, Sam didn't feel that way. Now, this would go on, and Sam would come again, and he would always say, "Mama, calm down. Don't worry about it. There's no problems here." See, the Calneva was split into thirds in terms of the cabanas that were in front of the Great Tower. The ones on the right were for all the rat packers and the celebrities and Marilyn Monroe, where the caves were. Now, the ones in the middle were for the politicians, John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and their cronies. And then, of course, the ones way off on the left of the trees, Sam Giancana. And only Frank could find a way to sort of keep all of these people happy, and perhaps even there at the same time, and make it work. Only Frank would even dare to do something like that. That'll never happen again. At least I don't think so. So Sam would come for his final visit in 1963. Frank, of course, would sit down with him and give him the same old routine. Say, "Here's how we do it, Sam. You know the deal." Sam would say, "Don't worry about it, Frank. I'm a calm guy." Well, he saw a man hitting on one of his other girlfriends. See, when you're the mob boss, you think you have girlfriends that are not even your girlfriends. You feel entitled to it as well, right? So Sam saw a man by the name of Victor Collins hitting on one of his girlfriends, one of the Wire sisters, who were performing there in those days. And he didn't like it very much. So he had one of his henchmen literally beat the garbage out of the man. And somebody had figured out that it was the mob boss and reported him to the Nevada Gaming Commission, which in turn called Frank Sinatra to say, "Sam Giancana hanging out in Calneva, is it true?" And he says, "Sam Giancana, don't see him on the guest list. Nobody of that name here." He tried to play it off like he didn't even know who Sam Giancana was. Like he could actually make the DA believe that he didn't have any connection with the mafia, which was the most outrageous thing in the world, because everybody knows that Frank Sinatra and the mafia go together like love and marriage and a horse and carriage. So he lost his gaming license in 1963, and even with all of Frank's influence, even with all of his clout, not just from a celebrity standpoint, but from a political standpoint, he couldn't brush this problem under the proverbial rug. So he had to sell the interest, and in 1963, the glory days of the Calneva were over. But that $2 million built the Frank Sinatra Celebrity Showroom, which was built to Frank Sinatra's specifications perfectly. And there was even a room up above where the mafia would sit, so that they weren't mingling with the public down below, because he was still trying to make Sam happy one way or the other. And there was a circle bar in the middle of the hotel. And can you imagine for a moment Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Sam Giancana himself, all having cocktails together even before John Kennedy was elected president in 1960. That's a pretty interesting, why this hotel can't make it on that story alone is more interesting than the story. And maybe a new story needs to be written eventually. But it's funny because people still want to go to the Calneva now. When I tell that story on the boats or something, they go, "Where is that place? I want to see that." And they do give tours of the tunnels underneath the hotel, and they'll give tours of Maryland and Frenchman. They also say the hotel, incidentally, is one of the 100 most haunted buildings in the United States. They say Marilyn Monroe still trying to get wet. Sam Giancana inside the Calneva. I wonder if that's true or if it's just a clever way for the GM to try to get some people. "Come on in, man. There's 800 ghosts in here. Come on."
It's for sale. You can buy it.
That's right. You can buy it. I wonder if and I'm telling you, that price has come down so much between you and I, we might be able to buy that. But that's just one of the great stories, Another great story is that we know about Mark Twain being here, Sam Clemens, before he became Mark Twain, right? And now when Mark Twain came here, naturally, he was trying to build a timber ranch, right? He wanted to become rich off a timber ranch because they were selling the wood for the mines and everything in Virginia City. So him and his partner John Kinney came to Lake Tahoe, and they claimed about 170 acres of Tahoe land. It was free of charge based on the Homestead Act. And Mark Twain, to be honest, in those days was rather lazy. He was ambitious to make money, but he really wasn't ambitious to do work. So he claims about how he dropped trees. See, the Homestead Act had it such that if you claimed your land and built a fence around it, it was yours, free of charge, based on the Homestead Act. Well, Mark Twain's idea of building a fence was to drop 6 trees over 170 acres to form an enclosure. That's a very lazy way of building a fence. And I suspect if he wasn't so unsuccessful in making his timber ranch, he probably wouldn't have gone on to be the editor of the paper in Virginia City. And the most interesting story about Mark Twain is the fact that the first time he ever took his nom de guerre as Mark Twain was out of Virginia City writing a small piece about the frogs of Calabasas, the jumping frogs of Calabasas, and then they came looking for him. Have you ever seen, where's Mark Twain? And all the people would tell him, it's Mark Twain. We don't know who he is, because he had never ever written that name down, ever before. So all the people in Virginia City had no idea who Mark Twain was, and when they came looking for him, nobody knew who they were talking about. One other thing I wanted to tell you about is the legend of the monster in the lake. Now, a lot of people know of Talbot, right? And you've seen the little stuffed animals. And incidentally, I just found out that there's a very good possibility that the Tahoe brand is going to be discontinued, which I'm shocked by. Why would it ever stop? I don't know. I have no idea. I think Bob McCormick, who's the guy that runs it, he's spending a little more time in Mexico now, so he's not quite as fascinated with Tahoe as he might have once been. But the story of Tahoe is really interesting. It's not so much about the stuffed animal or the fact that there's a legend of a monster, but that maybe, you know, has been turned into a fictional cartoon character. But the story and the legends around the monster lake is compelling. It's really interesting. So, you know, the white man came to Lake Tahoe in the mid-1800s due to the discovery of silver in Virginia City, the Comstock, the biggest silver deposit in the history of the world that would finance the North's effort to win the Civil War. Well, they came to Lake Tahoe looking for the trees. See, if you've ever been to Virginia City, and even if you haven't, well, let me give you a little advice. There's nothing grows there. It's one of the most barren places in the world. Even Mark Twain once said, and I quote, "It was the most uninhabitable place on earth. Nothing grew there. Even the birds, when they flew over, carried their own provisions." So they came to Lake Tahoe looking for the trees. And once they saw the trees, well, the Indians tried to warn them. And they said, "Monster, it's big." And the white man said, I love monster stories, man. They're so cool. We're going to cut all the trees down. They didn't care about the Indians. They didn't care about the beauty of Lake Tahoe. They didn't care the story about monsters. They cared about those trees. So they cut 50,000 acres of trees down to support the Comstock load. Every tree you could see, gone, clear cut. And they commercially fished the lake almost bone dry to support all the hungry mouths living in Virginia City. But as they were starting to cut the trees down, they were seeing the monster too. And there were petroglyphs of this monster in the caves and cave rocks. So what's really, really down there? Well, the stories of Indians trying to warn the white man of a monster in the lake was not folklore or legend of the Indians. It was truth. They believed a massive serpentine monster lived in an underwater cave right underneath Cave Rock. And they lived in these sheltered caves above it that they lived in because it was so protected from their enemy. So they literally watched it go in and out. And they didn't know what it was. They just knew it was bigger than everything else. But the question really is, what did they see? Is it still wrong? Can there be only one? There can't be one because it has to breed. Must be two. That's when the stories of giant fish in Lake Tahoe started to surface. And I don't mean like a bass or a trout. I mean giant prehistoric sturgeon. Sturgeon that swim in deep fresh water. And that's all Lake Tahoe offers, is deep fresh water, a whole lot of it. So there have been stories and legends of sturgeon swimming in the lower depths of Lake Tahoe for almost 100 years. Now that was just a legend until the mid-1980s when one of these sturgeon came out of the water and swam alongside the hull of the Tahoe, the sister ship of the MS Dixie, the second largest paddle whaler on the lake. Now people were shocked. They didn't know what, and just to be honest with you, I'm trying to investigate this story right now. I want evidence of this because I've heard 3 different captains from the Queen tell me about the story. That a sturgeon came out and swam alongside the hull some 15 feet long. Now to see a fish that big, if you saw it in open water with nothing else around, you would definitely think it was a monster. There's just no question. Too big a fish.
Then the most famous fish story comes out of Dollar Point some 25 years ago when a man went fishing just like he had every single day. This day would be quite different. As he dropped his line, he grabbed a hold of what he believed to be a 40-pound Mackinaw trout, a very large freshwater fish. But as he started to reel it out of the water, suddenly his line went slack. Something underneath the water grabbed hold of his fish and ripped it away from him. So he pulled the rest of his line out of the water because curiosity killed the catch, dying to know what's at the end of his line. And as he pulled his line out of the water, he found but just the head of that Mackinaw trout, bitten in half, was something with large serrated teeth that bit through it like you and I would bite through a cracker. What does that mean? I don't really know. People say, is it a monster? I don't know. Something's down there. It might be a mutation of a monster and a sturgeon or something. And it would be able to hide so easily because the water's so deep and so vast you might not ever see it. And it might not even need to come to the surface for very, very long stretches of time. But of course, then the most compelling piece of evidence surrounding the monster of the lake came in the mid-1970s when famed oceanographer Jacques Cousteau came to Lake Tahoe, took his submersible down to find out how deep the bottomless lake was. Even the most famous oceanographer in the world dying to know it's really down there. And as he came out, he never revealed 1 foot of film, not 1 word of his data. He simply said, the world is not ready for what's down there. I'll let you chew on that. Who wants to go first? Now, people often ask us, well, did Jacques Cousteau really go down there? Well, I don't even know if I was 4 years old at the time. I have no idea whether Jacques Cousteau actually went down. Now, the story that I understand is that a Jacques Cousteau submersible went down. So, we believe it was Jacques Cousteau's son who was behind the helm, which incidentally, he's more qualified than his father now. He's like twice as qualified as his father was because he's done way more expeditions than his dad has. But the bottom line is that Jacques Cousteau himself released the statement. So if he releases the statement, it says it's as good as if he went down, because he would never say that unless he really believed what happened. Now, what he saw, well, that's debatable. Who knows what he saw? Maybe he saw 50 huge sturgeon with giant sharp teeth. Oh, man. If kids knew about that, that wouldn't be no good for Lake Tahoe. Now, the other theory is the stories of the fact that Lake Tahoe was a cemetery for a very long time. Now, the Indians fought over Cave Rock, right? The Paiutes and the Washoes fought over Cave Rock. And the Washoes would gain control of Cave Rock. And once their dead would die, they wouldn't bury them in the ground. They would take their dead to the 800-foot precipice of Cave Rock and ceremonially drop them into the lake. Why, you ask? Well, there's an old saying in Lake Tahoe, it goes in Lake Tahoe, it stays in Lake Tahoe. So if you're looking to get rid of something, it's rather convenient, you know. So God only knows over those thousands of years how many Indians were ceremonially dropped off the top of Cave Rock, but it must have been a whole lot. Then you had the Chinese workers who built the railroads over Donner Summit. And a lot of them died. And they simply didn't know what to do with them, and they didn't have the decency to give them a good burial or to contact their family. They were trying to get that railroad done, so they knew that Lake Tahoe didn't give up their dead, so they would take the bodies to Lake Tahoe and simply dump them in the lake, because it was a convenient and easy way of dealing with the problem. And then, of course, there's the Cal Neva and the Mafia, running it, what, 25, 30 years, being involved with Cal Neva. I mean, how many people did they dump in the lake with concrete galoshes? Who knows, right? And then Jacques Cousteau, as I understand it, when he went down near the deepest part of the lake. And that's right near the Cal Neva. So maybe when he went down there, he saw a bunch of these Mafia bodies down there. And then maybe the Mafia called him. Said, hey, Jacques, understand you were down at the bottom of Lake Tahoe? You're not going to talk about that stuff, are you? Because we're going to have to kill you if you do. Anyway, so I wanted to tell you one last story really quick. This is one of my very, very favorite stories. Now, there's 2 people that lived in Lake Tahoe, and I think that from the way that they lived in the area are the most compelling people. And it's not because they were famous to start with, but they became infamous because of the way they lived their life. One of those men is Captain Dick Barker. Now, he was the first man ever to live in Emerald Bay. Now, he came to Emerald Bay in 1863. And he worked as a caretaker for a man who owned a summer cottage on the shoreline. And he never left the bay. And he would build a small cabin on the island. And he would basically claim this little piece of land that was his, free of charge, based on the Homestead Act. But he was paranoid somebody would steal his house And he knew that he had the most beautiful place in the world. And he was so afraid that somebody would take his house that he almost never left the bay. And not just because he was paranoid, but he really loved being by himself. And they would see him rolling along in his little sailboat, Nancy, laying on the bottom, laying in the back of the boat, just looking up at the sky, and people would say, "There's the hermit of Emerald Bay." Now, Captain Dick never left the bay because he was afraid somebody would steal his house. But there was one thing that would drag him out of the bay. Well, you know, when you get that itch, sometimes you just must scratch it. And he would get in his little sailboat, Nancy, and he would row 17 miles to Tahoe City for a bottle of whiskey. He would hit the Tahoe House, his favorite bar, where he would get full lubricated. And he would get back into his boat with as many bottles of whiskey as he could put in there. And his friends would say, "Why are you leaving, Captain? Why don't you stay?" He would say, "I gotta go back down on the bay. I don't even know if my house is still there." So he would start rowing into the wintry waters of Lake Tahoe, and his friends would fear for his life, as Captain Dick simply didn't care for his own well-being. He simply cared for that place that he had in Emerald Bay, and it was more important than anything else. Now, one of his journeys, he fell out of his boat and he nearly drowned in Lake Tahoe. And if it weren't for that whiskey, he would have certainly died. But it kept him warm enough, just long enough, until he got back to his little cabin where he remained unconscious for several days. And when he finally awoke, he realized he had a bigger problem, as all of his toes completely frostbitten, not salvageable. So the good captain did the unthinkable. He amputated all of his toes with a carpet knife. Now, most people would think the story would end there, but the captain was proud of his toes. He kept them in a box. And when people would come to the island, he would tell us stories of how he dodged death, and he would take the box out, and he would shake the box. And he would say, "There's my toes." Now, as time went by, he knew he would never leave Emerald Bay because he knew it was his favorite place in the world. So he decided to build his own tomb at the top of the island. A small white chapel with a white cross on the side that said Captain Dick to memorialize his life. And he told everybody he encountered, "When you should find my body in the waters of Lake Tahoe, be sure to bury it at the tomb at the top of the island." He died in Lake Tahoe just as predicted. They never found his body because, as I said before, it goes in Lake Tahoe, stays. That's when the stories of the ghost of the hermit of Emerald Bay started to surface. As people thought they'd seen, of course they probably had a bottle of whiskey with them too, they had seen on those cold, misty nights, old Captain Dick crawling out of the waters of Lake Tahoe, climbing up the rocks from that island with his bottle of whiskey in his hand, trying to make it to his tomb at the top of the island, his final resting place where he was never buried. That story is just great. I always think about how great it would be to tell that story to a bunch of kids sitting around a campfire at the boat camp in Emerald Bay. Sit down there. My God, can there be anything better than that story? Now, of course, the other guy that lived incredibly, perhaps even crazier than that, it was John Snowshoe Thompson, the skiing mailman. Now, John Snowshoe Thompson came from the Telemark district of Norway in 1851 when he was 24 years old. Now, the Telemark district of Norway is the birthplace of skiing. He did everything with skis. His family only knew skiing. That's all they knew. When he came to Sacramento in 1851, he hoped to strike it rich during the gold rush. But of course, he never found the gold. What he found were the snow-capped Sierra Nevada mountains, and a ski bum sees his riches, and he can't control his desire. So he decided to stay, make a life of it. He built a pair of 10-foot wooden skis weighing 25 pounds, made of solid oak. He used a massive balancing pole to try to keep his equilibrium because the skis were so long and so awkward that how could you even stay standing on them? Now, the young people, they were just enamored by Snowshoe. They didn't even understand what he was doing. They just knew they wanted to do it too. So his notoriety grew exponentially. But of course, his pocketbook didn't grow with it, as he simply was really just a guy who loved skiing, was very fascinated with the mountains, would actually be one of the first people ever to organize ski races in the state of California. He was one of the first people ever to ski in the whole continent of North America. And then he saw an ad in a local paper in Sacramento calling for a postal carrier to deliver the mail from Placerville, 90 miles, to the little town of Genoa in the Carson Valley in the dead of winter. They couldn't get the mail over the mountains in the wintertime because the trains get stuck in the snow. Well, Lake Tahoe averages over the passes 350 inches on average. It's 30 feet of snow on average. So then they would hire people to walk the mail over the mountains. But you try walking 90 miles in 30 feet of snow. They simply couldn't do it. They'd come back, they'd give the mail back to the post office, but we can't do it. So Snowshoe answered, he said, "I'll do it on my ski." And the Postal Service said, "We're not going to pay you because we don't believe you can do it. Nobody ever has. Snowshoe said, give me that mail. He took 60 pounds of mail, delivered it 90 miles in 3 days, dropped it off, made it home in 48 hours. The Postal Service was so happy, they asked John only one thing. They said, can you carry 100 pounds of mail? So he did. He dragged 100 pounds of mail in a giant net behind his 10-foot wooden skis, carrying everything from pots and pans, medicine, clothing, tools, you name it. And to the homesteaders along the way, he would make deals. That's how he made his money. Snowshoe truly loved being outside in nature. And people often argue with me, how could you call him a ski bum? I say, well, I call him a ski bum because he clearly loved skiing more than he loved money. Clearly. And that's like the prerequisite for being a ski bum. I mean, you just have to simply love skiing more than you love money. There's no doubt about it. Snowshoe definitely is the most qualified man for that. Now, he would make deals with these homesteaders, and can you imagine being one of these homesteaders? Never ever seen Snowshoe before. And suddenly he comes walking through the meadow with a giant net behind his skis. He must have looked a little bit like Santa Claus. For he was the one man that could bring you something you needed. So he would make these deals. Now, Snowshoe, no matter how charitable you ever thought you were in your life, you were never as charitable as Snowshoe Thompson. He found a man dying of hypothermia in a cabin, so he tried to nurse him to good health for 2 days, but realized he couldn't save the man's life. So he put his skis on, skied 2 days to Genoa, picked up several men, skied 2 days back to the man's house, put him on a contraption, dragged him 2 days back to Genoa, and took him to the doctor's office. The doctor said, well, thank you for bringing him, but I don't have enough anesthesia to save this man's life. So Snowshoe said, put his skis back on. Skied and walked 3 days to Sacramento. Picked up the necessary anesthesia, walked and skied 3 days back to Genoa, dropped it off, asked nothing for it, said, I've got to go now, back to Placer, to pick up the mail, to bring it back here. I mean, one, who would ever be that charitable? Two, who has this free time on their hands? Unbelievable, available free time. I know that would never happen on my friend. Well, Snowshoe decided to retire after 20 years of delivering mail. That's right, twice a month. 20 years. He made that trip 90 miles in each direction. Never missed a delivery. And he decided to settle down in the town of Genoa, and he got married. And his wife said, John, we need some money. It's funny how that is. And John said, oh yeah, money, I never. So he went to the Postal Service. He said, it's cold out there. 20 years. Bears and wolves and things. Never missed a delivery. I was thinking maybe I get a little pension. Something. Postal Service said, gosh, John, I don't recall you ever signing a contract. Don't recall ever having any record of you even doing this work. Snowshoe said, you gave me the mail. I delivered it every time. What else do you need to know? It is what it is. Well, Snowshoe was fine. Just couldn't believe it and treat him that way. So he decided to get on the train and take his case to the United States Congress. He started to make his way, but wouldn't you know it, his train got stuck in the snow. In Colorado. Stuck in the snow again. So Snowshoe did what only he could do. He got out and skied 3 days to Wyoming. Got on another train, made it to the nation's capital, waited 6 weeks for a congressional committee to hear his case. He never did. He returned home dead broke. Died 2 years later in the town of Genoa of total discontent. And you ask yourselves, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want it. Snowshoe Thompson, I got a tear in the eye. I didn't know I was going to come to a lecture and get a cry. He deserved better than that. So I'm going to leave you. This is my last thing I'm going to tell you about the town of Genoa, the oldest town in Nevada. Well, I went down there because right after Snowshoe died, they built a museum for him. Well, they didn't have enough money to pay him while he was alive, but as soon as he died, they had enough money to erect a museum, several statues, and charge admission. They even misspelled his name on his tombstone. This poor guy couldn't catch a break. Now, his pair of 10-foot wooden skis are in the Smithsonian Institute, right where they belong, the bravest and most courageous mailman in the history of the United States, if not the world. Well, I went to the Snowshoe Thompson Museum to find out if what I'm telling you is true. Because you look at a guy like me, you can't see it yourself. How honest is he? That's a fair statement, more fair than you know. But the truth is that the truth of the story is never interesting. But what was across the street from the Snowshoe Thompson, now that is very interesting, the oldest bar in Nevada. Called the oldest thirst parlor in Nevada. That's the name of the bar. And I said to myself, as a storyteller, maybe I should go in there. It's a heck of a tax write-off, too, I might add. So I went in there, and they poured me one of the most fantastic Bloody Marys I've ever had in my life. And she said, I've got stories for you. I said, that's why. She said, John, what do you want to do this bar? The first day he started filming the movie The Shoes, looked at the bartender and said, what's the most money you've ever made on the biggest night you've ever had? Well, the bartender looked at him and said, gave him the amount, and he said, fine, I'll pay that for the next 9 days. Shut the bar down. See, he didn't want the public bothering him while he was filming the movie, so he paid the most money they ever made on the biggest night they ever had for 9 nights in a row. And I suspect it wasn't that much money, you know, because there's only 3 people in that bar. Good night. James Caan and Kathy Bates were in that bar. It seemed almost every night they filmed the movie Misery. It probably seemed like nothing to the bartender at the time until he saw the movie. And he realized, my God, those people couldn't pay to each other any more than they did in that movie. But at the end of the day, let's have a couple laughs, a couple beers. We'll talk about how we're going to kill each other tomorrow again. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Johnny Cash walked into the bar. Did an impromptu show for an hour to 3 people. The same 3 people that are always in there. And I wonder if those 3 people even knew who Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, or Johnny Cash were. Well, John Denver had his own booth in the bar. John Denver, of course, loved Lake Tahoe. He had a Celebrity Ski Classic at Heavenly Valley in the 70s. And he would go to that bar and would say, I like that bar. Nobody ever bothers me. Well, if John Denver were alive, I would tell him, they don't know who you are, John. These people never leave this bar. There's nothing to do. Now, there's only one man that they truly admire. One man that they hold in high esteem. Well, they've heard so much about him. The ironic part is, he's been there all along. His name is Jack Daniels. Folks, it has been my great pleasure to lecture for you tonight. And thank you so much. I wanted to open it up for some questions, if anybody had a couple questions or something they're really curious of. Yes?
Steinbeck worked for her family.
No kidding? Was that at the Talbot house? Or where was it? Where was that at? Was that the fish hatchery? The Brigham House. Was that when he was working as a busboy or as
No,
a?
he was a caregiver.
He was a caregiver.
And
He was a caregiver.
about him, his autobiography.
Okay.
But in doing that, he also worked at the lodge at Palm Lake Lake. And
Right.
he drove ladies all around, of all.
How old would you say
I mean,
he was in those days?
His parents actually knew John's parents.
Mhm.
Because the man was a teacher at Stanford that ran the lodge at Palm Lake Lake. And you know, John was supposed to finish Stanford, and he didn't.
No
That's
kidding.
why he came to Tahoe. And,
So he was going to school at Stanford.
yeah, his sisters in the desert so well, but his folks looked upon him as a disappointment. But he wasn't, you know.
No.
But he got awfully, he actually, I'm sure talking in a minute, but he actually tutored my father and my uncle
No
in the
kidding.
fall before they left, before the.
So he was obviously a literature buff.
And he
No.
loved the family in the fall.
Yeah.
But when winter came, the depression hit everything.
Yeah.
And I know the feeling. But he really did well.
Yeah.
You have to read the autobiography.
About his time in
You read that.
about his time in Tahoe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
It's just one of those great little
I like
antidotes.
what you said. This lady and these ladies did a lot of research on the skier.
Snowshoe Thompson, yeah.
And all these people who are from here, because I was raised in Tahoe, but it's great what you said about it,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Snowshoe is that most people don't really understand his story. And I think that most people come to the area and, like I said, they often miss what's most important, you know? And it's really these stories about these people that make the place more interesting, more compelling, because why would they live like that? Like Captain Dick, I mean, to protect it, I mean, you know, it just was everything for
There
him.
were a lot of different men that were caregivers, and they were just the salt of the earth. 'Cause they
And
were-
generous like we don't understand generosity,
And
you
you
know?
just can't imagine what they went through. Cold.
Snowshoeing.
Yeah, it's
I don't, why did his toes get frostbitten? I mean, that's what I don't know. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, yes, yes. Is it Grace?
On your tape, do you
Yeah.
have to start at a certain place?
Yeah.
Oh, no. That's a good point. And I'll actually show you here on this map.
I wish you did sing for us.
I am only sad that I couldn't sing for you tonight. I mean, I really want to, I'm really upset. My
Did you come
guitar,
back?
my guitar had some problems with it, and I had to put it in and get it repaired. Now, I could certainly sing something a cappella for you if you like. Would you like that? Okay, I'm going to sing. Now, this is a song called This is a song about the history of Lake Tahoe. It's called Big Water. And I always wanted to put in a song. This is the first track and the last track on my tour guide. I always wanted to make a song in, like, say, 4 minutes that would really give you the gist of Tahoe's history and its compelling story. So it says this. Valentine's Day, 1844, Captain John Fremont first set his eyes upon the great blue chasm never seen before. And the story begins and a legacy's born. Tahoe by name, Tahoe by legend, the Indians call her Big Water in the sky. By the light of the full moon, they head for the summit, oh, along with their children for spiritual ride. From Thunderbird Lodge to Vikings Home, the Finette Island Tea House and the Captain's Ghost, to the graveyards of Glenbrook where the steamers went down, and the Queen of the Lake, oh, she's resting now, yeah. And the cross on Tulaco when the snow falls is an autograph left and placed by the gods. And no matter what you've seen, and no matter where you're from, when you come, you'll know Tahoe. I never really sing without my guitar. So without it, I feel like a little naked. Yeah, I'm on the Dixie. I'm not anymore. I'm only there in the summertime.
Okay.
From basically the beginning of June to the middle and the first week of September.
Great.
And I've been trying to get them to have me around more, but they don't seem to care. They're like, well, there's not enough people on the boat right now. But I also do, obviously, parties. I do, I come to anywhere and do lecture and storytelling. Huh?
Would you come to a fundraiser? We need someone like you.
For, what is the fundraiser?
Fundraiser to raise money.
Raise money? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Darrin,
Yes?
just let me say that his CDs are just wonderful.
Yeah.
We've listened to them and taken the tour, and now he'll tell a funny little story about a certain point here, and then he sings, like he did, a little ditty that he has written about what he's talked about, and it's just delightful. And it's so fun to have visitors and give them the CDs and just send them on their way.
She brings up a very funny point. I've had people come up to me constantly and they'll say, I'm off the hook. And I go, I didn't really think that I was going to help that way, but I'm glad I got out. I don't want to drive them around the lake. I don't have time, I don't even know what to tell them if I drive around the
But
lake.
now, what a beautiful Christmas present, too.
Oh, it's a great gift for anybody that loves Lake Tahoe, or anybody who's curious about Lake Tahoe. Now, this map comes on the inside. So it's a double CD and the map folds out. These maps I also sell for $8 just separately, but the maps, it's funny because what you do is you fold the map out. Here's basically the way that it works. You can start anywhere. It doesn't matter. As long as you start on a corresponding track and you move clockwise, you're fine. It works in real time. Because the time is the same no matter where you start. As long as you start on a track and you move, you're fine. But I have the numbers starting at a state line in South Lake Tahoe, and that's only because that's the bed market for Lake Tahoe. I mean, most of the people are in South Lake, and I was really trying to appeal to the masses, so to speak. And it was funny too, because I met with South Lake Tahoe and I showed them this, and they look at this, they go, North Shore loves it. Well, this is for the North Shore Lake Tahoe Resort Association. This thing's great. It's so good. There's so much we can do with this. South Shore goes, well, I don't understand. Down up in North Shore, you got Tahoe and the Olympics and Bonanza, and down here you have the Angora Fire. I mean, thanks a lot. Thanks a whole lot. So then I said to them, this is in front of the Lake Tahoe Visitor Authority. They're bored. And I said, well, yeah, but the numbers start out of South Lake Tahoe. So they come here. I mean, this is a day adventure for them to go all the way around the lake and come back to your great hotel and think about how great Lake Tahoe is. I mean, I don't know how you can be any more generous than that. I could have had it start out of Incline Village, you know, but I had to start out South Lake. So it's just fun. It shows you how one of the saddest things, and this is my mission, folks, and I don't know whether I'm going to accomplish this or not, but my dream is to be the glue that connects North Shore and South Shore together.
Yeah.
Because there's a serious political problem going on in Lake Tahoe. And it's silly. It's silly. They are doing a bad job for Lake Tahoe in terms of people knowing about it, because South Shore protects South Shore, North Shore protects North Shore. They don't want anything to do with one another. And ironically, what's the destination is Lake Tahoe. Has nothing to do with South Shore, North Shore. And then the ski areas, you know, North Star is like, I don't want to deal with Squaw Valley. And Squaw Valley's over, I'm talking to North Star. And Heavenly's like, it had nothing to do with North Shore. See, I mean, what they should be doing is all working together to create this incredible location, because you have the most beautiful lake in the world. So I've made it my mission. I told the LTV, I said, I'm like the Lorax. I speak for the trees. You know, nobody else can speak for them, so I'm going to speak for the lake, and I'm going to be the glue that combines the two things together, because you can't control me. I'm just the guy who loves Lake Tahoe. I'm no political affiliation. I'm not connected to a group. I'm not paid backdoor by anybody. I just love Lake Tahoe. I love it all. I love the South Shore, the North Shore, all of it. It's beautiful.
But you're from Incline Village?
I'm from Incline. Now, I'm going to be honest with you.
That's fine.
I'm a little
It's
bit
beautiful
more
place.
biased to the North Shore. You'll never see me living in the South Shore. Let me put it to you that way. Now, it's not to say that I don't think there isn't a nice place to live in the South Shore. I just don't want to live in the South Shore proper. Because the problem with South Shore is you're driving along the road and you're like, this is nice. Once you go one block in, you realize there's some serious poverty in this town. There's some serious unemployment in this town. I mean, that breaks your heart. Why is it? And then the thing is, they don't invest enough money in bringing more people, which creates more jobs. And the lifeline is the service industry, and the city of South Lake Tahoe honestly believes that they don't need tourism to be a city. And I think it's crazy. I don't know how you can feel that way. But you know what? It wouldn't be the first time that there was a crazy person at home something important. So, and it won't be the last time either. So let me just tell you a few things about what's inside of this. Now, first of all, you can see that it's broken into 5 sections. There's the South Shore, the West Shore, the Truckee River Squaw Valley, the North Shore, and the East Shore. So I actually included Squaw Valley, the drive out to Squaw Valley and back, because I feel that the Olympics and the story of Squaw Valley is such an interesting story that it deserved to be in there. So you can either decide to go to Squaw or not. So you can just literally bypass that leg of the tour if you don't want to go to Squaw Valley. But literally, the tour works where it gives you audio and stories and songs and everything all the way to Squaw and back to Tahoe City again. So you get it both directions while you're driving. Now, inside of these sections here, it gives you 3 different things. Now, let's say you just drove up the hill at Kingsbury and you got to State Line and you said, I'm going to start my tour. Disc 1, track 1. When you put it in, it'll give you an introduction. That introduction will tell you how the tour works, how you can stop it, replay it, pause it, whatever. The most important thing is if you want to get out and see something on Lake Tahoe, you don't have to worry about the CD because the car always pauses what's in your plan. So once you turn your car back on, you're right where you need to be to keep going. So you don't have to think about where you're starting it as you keep moving forward. See, my intention was to make this because I don't think most people want to be on a tour bus. They want to be in their own car and they want to do things on their terms. They don't want to do things on, because I would be on a tour bus and some nice lady would come to me, why didn't we stop at Cave Rock? I don't understand it. And I go, I'm just a tour guide. I don't drive the bus. But I realized that this is what people want. Okay, so within these sections, you're going to get 3 things. These little circle dots, which are color coordinated depending on which part of the lake you're on, are the stories of the lake, the history of the lake, and they have built-in sound effects. So if I'm telling you about Captain Dick rowing in his boat, you can hear the oars and the boat moving while he's rowing. And you can feel the wind blowing and the wolves. If I'm telling you about Snowshoe Thompson, you can hear a man going, coughing, and the wind's howling, and the wolves are howling, and the wind is blowing, and you can imagine how lonely he was out there. And Snowshoe would even, there was a legend that he used to stare down wolves in the backcountry. He would just simply say, I'd stare at them longer than they stare at me, which is a very simple idea. It's the execution of that idea that I learned very difficult, particularly when you're by yourself. So in any event, you get the circle dots. Now the circle dots are the great stories of the legends of the lake. So every story has built-in sound effects. If I'm telling you about Frank Sinatra, you can hear flying into the moon, slot machines, women laughing, an orchestra trying to get in tunes if they're in the Calneva, the celebrity showroom. Then you get the cool spot tracks. There's 8 of those. The cool spot tracks tell you everything you need to know. That's the true tour guide telling you about the parks, the museums, the beaches, the best places to eat, what to do, what not to do. So you're literally just getting spoon-fed to you. You don't have to work for this information. Just driving your car going, okay, you told me not to stop there. We don't have to stop there. Okay, well, he told us to go into D.O. Bliss State Park because there's a lighthouse. It's the highest lighthouse in the continental United States. Did you know that? There's a lighthouse on the Rubicon Point at D.O. Bliss State Park. It's the highest lighthouse in the continental United States. Now, it was only commissioned in 1916 to 1919 when there were no roads around Lake Tahoe, and the SS Tahoe steamer was the only way you could get around the lake. They decommissioned it in 1919, and it has fallen on hard times, and it has now been mistaken for an outhouse. So we now call it the highest outhouse. I tell people I'm a storyteller. I say, with that, you get fish, you get non-fish. You get the truth, you get the folklore, you get the legend, you get the myth, you get it all. Bottom line is you're going to want it, regardless of whether you believe it's true or not. And I even have, but I'm really happy to tell you too, McAvoy Lane. I don't know if you know who McAvoy Lane is. The McAvoy Lane is the ghost of Mark Twain. I called him up and I said, you know, I'm planning on writing the Mark Twain Virginia City story. I said, but you know, there's a funny line that is in one of Clint Eastwood's movies where he says, a man needs to know his limitations. So I said to him, he says, what? Mac, just as he always says, because even when he's not Mark Twain, he's Mark Twain, you know. He says, what are you asking of me? What exactly do you want? Well, I realize that I can't do the story. You have to do it. Because I can't do it as well as you do it. I'm realizing my limitations. Well, how long is it going to be? I was thinking 5 minutes. How much is it going to cost? And Max says, how dare you suggest money? So he did it for free. And I said, how much time do you need? Max goes, 5 minutes. I said, do you think you'll need it on your, do you think you'll need to do more than one take? So my producer meets him. I said, so how did it go with Mac? He goes, it was about 5 minutes. Then he was gone. He says to me, he goes, I've told this story a few times, you know. I said, he said, oh, it's only been, you know, I've only been alive some 180 years. Oh, I love Mac. So he does the whole story as Mark Twain in Virginia City in here, and he's totally irreverent, like he would be. But and he's a marvelous guy. I mean, I just love McAvoy so much. So, and even of course, the last story I tell is Saving Lake Tahoe. My whole intention with this was to try to create consciousness of the story of the lake, and by doing that, at the end, you might be more willing to listen to the struggles that the lake is having right now. So let me just say real quickly a couple things that are happening in Lake Tahoe. I actually got to sing on behalf of the Tahoe Forum, which was a huge event that they have every year where the 4 senators come together, Feinstein, Harry Reid, Boxer, and Ensign. So Ensign called me. He said, why don't you come and tell your story at the forum? I said, I'm honored to do that. Thank you so much. I didn't even think you need to do that. So they talked about, the thing they're most worried about right now is invasive aquatic species. It's actually overtaken forest fires and every other problem that's the clarity of the lake. The biggest problem with these invasive aquatic species that are having these little mussels that are getting on people's hulls of their boats, and they're getting into the lake, and they're nasty little things. They destroy the clarity, they fall apart, and they get murky, and then their shells wash up on the beach, and they've already gotten in the lake, and they spread fast. I mean, something like each one can breed like several
So that's why
thousand.
they're having inspections and everything.
That's why they inspect the hulls of every single boat. But they say that this mussel thing may be the biggest problem the lake has ever had. And it's amazing. As soon as they get one thing under control, something else comes along. A forest fire thing, I mean, Schwarzenegger and Gibbons have done a pretty decent job of cooperatively working together to do what they need to do to manage the forest. Now, Schwarzenegger hasn't done as good a job as Gibbons has done on the maintenance of the forest, and that's probably because California's dead broke. They don't have any money to spend on anything. But you really will notice if you go along the East Shore how marvelous a job they've done on the forest, managing, cleaning it up, and really thinning it out. And that's going to post well if we ever, every time you see that smoke in the air. Don't do this to us, please, not again, you know. So that's the biggest problem right now. So
And now you have the warmer fish coming in. What is that other fish that's coming in?
Yeah, well, I know the one that they're really worried about is this pike hanging in the lake.
Yeah, but there's another one that goes into warm waters, it's coming to our lake.
And also the lake is warming, which is a problem too.
Yeah.
Over the years, it's just been warming, you know, so, because we're not getting as cold of winters, it's not long, we're not getting as much
Yeah, it's
snowfall.
like a global warming.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a drought right now for the last 2 or 3 years, and that hurts us a lot, you know, and they've even had these sections in Marla Bay where this crazy green algae's growing, just
Right.
crazy, they don't even know what it is. And they've been able to, what they're doing with the mussels now is they're covering them and they're suffocating them, killing them where they can find them. The problem is they breed so fast. And how can you go down at the bottom of the lake and figure out where they all are? You know, so it's a very tricky
You
thing.
really have to watch the huge boats like the Keys or where you
Well,
live. all
and as you
that.
know, the Tahoe Keys was the single greatest mistake
I
ever,
know.
like Tahoe. I just can't believe they ever put that in. I just don't understand it. As you know, the Keys is the natural filtration system for Lake Tahoe and the flatlands, the South Shore. And they dredged up and built all these houses on the Keys right where, imagine a swimming pool, right? And the swimming pool has that little thing on the side that filters the swimming pool, right? Well, imagine just, you know, ripping that out and putting a bunch of houses on whatever that is. You know, and expecting the lake to still filter naturally as it always does. So that's a real sad thing.
And that was a beautiful place.
The one thing I will tell you is that the clarity of the lake has been leveling off as of recently. And that partly they think is due, they've spent a lot more money on the lake. I mean, Bill Clinton was here and he invested something like $1 billion in the lake. But they think they finally got the curve of the loss of clarity to start kind of leveling, which is good at about 70 feet. So,
When we grew up in Tahoe, growing
Yeah.
up back in the 40s and 50s, there was the Keys, beautiful area with wild ducks. You know,
just gorgeous. I mean, you
Yes,
know.
nesting areas.
Yeah,
Yes,
nesting.
but
Yes.
I didn't know if you knew, but there's some agencies at Tahoe, Forest Service and the Water Control Board and all these different groups have planned, they're going to reroute the Truckee River where it comes out near the Keys, and they're going to put it back where it was originally.
Oh, that's good.
And then
Yeah.
that will filter
Yeah,
the water
Better.
through that meadow there.
smart. Rather than going to the Keys.
A couple of years ago, a friend of mine was in the,
Yeah.
she's an engineer up
That's a
there.
great thing.
And so they're planning to do that, and that will help.
Keep our fingers
And you're
crossed.
right about
Yeah.
Dillingham and that would help.
where my family was next to the Cascade property.
Uh-huh.
Cascade River, 3 miles away, Cascade River, right home, my family.
Hold on. Folks, if you would like to buy one of these CDs, I'd be more than happy to autograph it for you. So, they are $20. I don't, what do you sell them for? $17.95? $17.95. We don't ever change the price of the Dungeon Store. No tax. No tax, yeah, no tax. Thank you very much again.